waitress and single mom walked into a bank auction with $11,000 and a feeling she couldn't explain. The room full of suits laughed when she raised her hand. What they didn't know, she had just bought the one piece of land that a powerful property developer needed to build his $50 million empire. And she wasn't selling. The auctioneer's voice bounced off marble walls like a pinball, fast and mechanical, calling out lot numbers that meant nothing to most people in the room. Rachel Carter meant nothing to most people in the room either. She stood near the back, clutching a manila folder so tightly that the edges bent. She was wearing her good blazer, the navy one she saved for job interviews and school meetings. But next to the tailored suits filling the front rows, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who did not belong here. That was fine. She hadn't come here to belong. The Chicago Downtown Bank foreclosure auction was held every quarter in the atrium of the First Midwest Bank headquarters on LaSalle Street. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, rows of padded chairs filled with property developers, investment firms, and lawyers whose hourly rates exceeded Rachel's weekly paycheck. The kind of room where money spoke quietly because it didn't need to raise its voice. Rachel had driven 40 minutes in a car that needed new brake pads to get here. She'd arranged for her neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, to pick up her daughter Sophie from school. She'd taken an unpaid day off from the diner, which meant this trip had already cost her more than she could comfortably afford. She opened the folder again. The property description was printed on a single page. Lot 14B, Southside Industrial Zone, 0.18 acres, access strip, no standing structures. The assessed value listed by the bank was $9,800. Starting bid, $8,500. Her father's voice echoed somewhere in the back of her mind. Some land looks like nothing until the right person looks at it right. Joseph Carter had told her that when she was 12, walking beside him through the scrubby lot adjacent to his garage on Dearborn Avenue. She hadn't understood it then. She barely understood it now. But when she'd seen the auction listing 6 days ago, recognized the address, felt her stomach flip, something told her to come. She hadn't told anyone, not her sister, not her friends. They would have talked her out of it. Lot 14B came up 40 minutes into the auction. By then, Rachel had watched $2 million worth of properties change hands in brisk, confident exchanges. The men in the front rows barely moved. A raised paddle here, a nod there. Business as usual. When the auctioneer announced Lot 14B, there was a ripple of something through the front section. Not excitement, amusement. Narrow access strip, south side, no structures, the auctioneer read. Starting bid, $8,500. A man in a charcoal suit leaned toward his colleague and said something low. They both smiled. Rachel caught the words Alleyland before they turned back. She recognized the logo on the folder sitting in the charcoal suit's lap. Halbrook Development Group. She'd seen it on a billboard near her sister's apartment. Coming soon, Halbrook Meridian, Chicago's next great mixed-use community. Nobody raised a paddle. The auctioneer scanned the room. 8-5. Do we have 8-5? Rachel raised her hand. 8,500. A few heads turned. The auctioneer nodded. 8-5 from the lady in the back. Do I hear 9? Silence. The man in the charcoal suit glanced back at her, then whispered something to the woman beside him. The woman covered her mouth. Someone 2 rows ahead actually laughed. A short, sharp sound, quickly swallowed. Rachel kept her hand steady. 8-5 going once? The auctioneer's voice was professionally bored. Going twice? He paused for exactly 3 seconds. Sold to the lady in the back for $8,500. Rachel exhaled. The paperwork took another hour. She sat at a side table with a bank associate who walked her through the transfer documents with the same energy of someone explaining a parking ticket. The land was hers for $11,000 after processing fees. As she gathered her papers to leave, she nearly collided with the man in the charcoal suit. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Mid-50s, silver cufflinks, a smile that had been trained to look warm. "Congratulations," he said. The word had a hollow center. "Thank you," Rachel said. "Marcus Webb," he said, extending a hand. "Hallbrook Development. That parcel you picked up, it's adjacent to our site." He paused. "If you ever think about selling, give us a call. We might throw you a small profit. Out of courtesy." Out of courtesy. She nearly smiled. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. She walked out through the marble atrium into the gray Chicago afternoon with $11,000 worth of land she hadn't even visited yet, and a feeling she couldn't fully name. Not confidence. Not yet. Something quieter. Something that felt the way a key feels in your hand before you figure out which lock it opens. She drove home to pick up Sophie, already thinking about what her father had seen in that strip of cracked earth decades ago, and wondering if she was finally starting to see it too. She didn't know yet, but Marcus Webb had just made the most expensive mistake of his career by walking away. The GPS took her to the wrong block first. Rachel sat in her idling car on a stretch of Dearborn Avenue that looked like it had been forgotten by the rest of the city, and was perfectly fine with that. Chain-link fences, a boarded-up warehouse wearing a mural that had once been colorful, a pile of cracked asphalt near a fire hydrant that hadn't worked since the Obama administration. She rolled forward slowly, checking the address on her phone against the numbers barely visible on the buildings. Then she turned the corner and stopped. She'd been here before. A long time ago, but the body remembers certain places the way the mind never quite can. The strip of land sat between two lots like a forgotten sentence between paragraphs. On the left was an empty, chain-fenced parcel, enormous, cleared, and recently graded. That was the Hallbrook site. She could see the fencing around it, their logo on a large sign promising luxury mixed-use living that was coming spring 2026. On the right was a cracked slab of concrete, weeds pushing through every fault line, and in the far corner, the ghost of a brick wall, maybe 4 feet high, that had once been part of something larger. Her father's garage. Or what was left of it. The county had demolished the structure after the foreclosure, but no one had bothered to haul away every remnant. This scrap of wall, stubborn and unremarkable, was the only thing still standing from Joseph Carter's 30-year business. She got out of the car and walked to it without really deciding to. She pressed her palm flat against the brick. It was cold, sun-bleached. One corner was tagged with old graffiti that had faded to a soft blur of purple. She stood there for a moment, not crying, not quite, just breathing the particular kind of quiet that grief leaves behind when it's been sitting somewhere for a long time. You'll understand it one day, Rach. Some land looks like nothing until the right person looks at it right. "Okay, Dad," she said softly, to no one and to him at the same time. "I'm looking." She pulled out her phone and used the property document to orient herself, pacing the perimeter of the lot. The strip was narrow, maybe 22 feet across, but longer than she'd expected. It ran almost the full length of the Hallbrook development parcel, from the street all the way back to what appeared to be an alley behind the block. That was the first thing she noticed. The second thing was the road. She almost missed it. The surface was weathered and cracked, overtaken in places by weeds and loose gravel, but the path was there, undeniable once you saw it. A worn track running diagonally across her land,
from a gap in the curb on Dearborn Avenue, straight through to a heavy gate on the edge of the Halbrook parcel. Old tire ruts had pressed themselves so deep into the earth that even years of neglect couldn't erase them. Someone had used this path, regularly, for a long time.
Rachel crouched down and pressed her fingers into one of the ruts. The earth was compacted hard underneath a thin layer of dry dirt. This wasn't a footpath. Something heavy, trucks, equipment, had rolled through here repeatedly. She stood and looked toward the Halbrook gate. A padlock hung on it now, a new padlock. She looked back at the street, at the curb cut, the specific lowering of the curb that allowed vehicles to enter. She hadn't noticed it driving in, but now that she was standing here, it was obvious. This wasn't accidental. This was a road. "You figuring it out?" The voice came from her left. She turned to find a man standing on the narrow sidewalk, hands in the pockets of a faded green jacket, watching her with the calm patience of someone who had all the time in the world and knew it. He was old, maybe 75, maybe older. His face was deeply lined, his hair white and close-cropped. He had the posture of a man who had worked physically his entire life and was now carrying the memory of that work in his joints. "I'm sorry?" Rachel said. "You're the new owner?" he asked, nodding toward her land. She straightened. "Yes, How did you know?" He smiled, small and knowing. "Word moves fast on a quiet block. I'm Jenkins. Lived on this street for 41 years. He pointed toward a narrow row house 2 doors down, its front stoop decorated with potted plants that had survived the Chicago winter through sheer stubbornness. "Knew your father." Rachel blinked. "You knew Joseph Carter?" "Fixed my truck twice. Charged me honest prices both times, which, in my experience, is rarer than people admit." He paused. "He was a good man. I was sorry when things went the way they went." Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to say too much. "Thank you." Jenkins stepped closer, studying the strip of land the way an old doctor examines something familiar. "You noticed the road?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "What is it exactly?" He exhaled slowly, as if this story had been waiting in his chest for the right moment. "That road's been there longer than I have. When this block was active, 3 garages, a fabrication shop, a welding place, all the delivery trucks used it. Couldn't come through the main lot next door. Zoning kept commercial vehicles off the residential access. So everything came through here. Supplies, fuel, equipment. Your father's shop controlled this end of it." He paused. "When the bank took his land, we figured they'd sort it out before they sold it. Guess they didn't." Rachel looked at the road again, then at the Halbrook site, then back at the road. "Sort what out?" she asked, though something in her stomach already knew. Jenkins looked at her steadily. "That road is the only way in from the street to that big lot. Back of the lot opens to an alley, but the alley's got a weight restriction. You can't run construction equipment through it. So everything, concrete trucks, steel, cranes, it all has to come through the front." He nodded toward the worn track on her land. "Through there." The silence that followed was the kind that rearranges things. Rachel turned slowly and looked at the Halbrook sign. "Coming spring, 2026. The gleaming rendering of a building that didn't exist yet. The promise of $50 million of progress. All of it feeding through a road that sat on land she had just bought for $11,000. She didn't say anything for a long moment. "Miss Carter," Jenkins said quietly, pulling his jacket tighter against the breeze. "I don't know what you plan to do with this land. That's your business. But I'd suggest, before you talk to anyone, you go look at what the county has on record for it." She looked at him. "Why?" He met her eyes. because I think what's written there might surprise even you." He gave her a small nod, turned, and walked back toward his row house with the unhurried dignity of a man who had just handed someone a torch and trusted her to know what to do with it. Rachel stood alone on her father's land, the wind moving through the weeds around her feet, the Halbrook sign looming large and confident in her peripheral vision. She pulled out her phone and searched for the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. She had no idea she'd just found the foundation of something they couldn't build around. The coffee shop was called Groundwork. It sat on the corner of Michigan Avenue and 18th Street, the kind of place that had exposed brick walls, pendant lights, and oat milk listed before regular milk on the menu board. The kind of place Rachel walked past but never walked into. She usually made her coffee at home. 49 cents a cup if she bought the grounds in bulk. She was on her lunch break from the diner when the message came. A text from an unknown number, polished and precise in a way that texts usually weren't. "Miss Carter, my name is Stephen Alcott. I represent Halbrook Development Group. I'd like to meet at a time convenient for you regarding the Dearborn Avenue property. We're happy to come to you, or suggest somewhere nearby. No pressure, just a conversation." She read it 3 times. 2 days. It had been 2 days since the auction. She hadn't told anyone about the land except Mrs. Kowalski, who had responded with mild concern and a plate of pierogi. She hadn't posted anything. She hadn't made any calls. She'd only walked the lot and talked to an old man on a quiet street. Yet here was Halbrook, already in her phone. She thought about ignoring it. She thought about it for approximately 4 minutes before texting back, "Tomorrow, 1 p.m., Groundwork on Michigan." She figured if she chose the location, she'd feel less like she was walking into something. She was wrong about that. Stephen Alcott was already there when she arrived, seated at a corner table, a flat white in front of him, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow in the universal language of "I'm approachable." He was younger than Marcus Webb, early 40s, with a practiced ease that Rachel immediately recognized as expensive, the kind of ease that gets coached. He stood when he saw her. "Ms. Carter." His handshake was firm but not aggressive, calibrated. "Thank you for coming. Can I get you something?" "I'm fine," she said, and sat down. He sat across from her and smiled, the kind of smile designed to make the other person relax. Rachel had spent 12 years waitressing. She had seen every version of that smile. She kept her hands flat on the table and her face pleasant and unreadable. "So," he said, settling back like they were old colleagues catching up. "First off, congratulations on the purchase. Lot 14B. Smart move, honestly." She said nothing. "We should have had eyes on it," he continued, shaking his head with a self-deprecating laugh. "Oversight on our end. These auctions move fast, you know how it is." She didn't know how it was, but she nodded. He leaned forward slightly. "Here's the thing, Miss Carter, and I'll be straightforward with you because I think you'll appreciate that." He paused, as though straightforwardness was a gift he was choosing to give her. "That strip of land is adjacent to our development site, which you probably know. And we'd love to work something out, keep everything moving smoothly. We're prepared to offer you $15,000 for the parcel. Clean title transfer, we handle all the paperwork, funds in your account within 5 business days." 15,000. She'd paid 11. That was a $4,000 profit in 4 days without doing a single thing. She knew this. He knew she knew this. The number had been selected very deliberately to sound generous without being generous. She looked at him. "That's an interesting number." He smiled. "We think it's fair, given the assessed value." "The bank assessed it at 9,008, she said. A flicker, brief, controlled, moved through his expression. She'd done her homework. That surprised him. "Right, so you'd be coming out well ahead." Rachel looked down at her coffee cup. She'd ordered one after all, black,
out of something like stubbornness, and said nothing for a moment. The silence stretched. Alcott let it go about 5 seconds before he filled it. "Honestly," he said, dropping his voice into something more confidential, "between us, it's not worth much. You got lucky at the auction. Nobody else bid because nobody else saw value there. We're offering above market because we want a clean, friendly transaction." He spread his hands. "That's it. It's not worth much. You got lucky." There it was. The velvet fist inside the handshake. The message underneath the message. Don't get ideas. Take the money. Be grateful. Rachel had been hearing versions of that her entire life. From landlords, from bank managers, from the school she'd tried to get Sophie into, from every room she'd walked into wearing her good blazer when the good blazer wasn't enough. She looked at him directly. "I appreciate you coming out, Mr. Alcott." He recognized the tone. His smile stayed in place, but something behind it adjusted. But I'm not ready to make any decisions right now," she said. Simple, clean, no apology attached. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Take your time. We're not in any rush." He was lying. She didn't know exactly why yet, but she knew it the way she knew when a table at the diner was about to ask for the check. Something in the body's frequency, the slight lean forward, the way the smile tightened at the edges. He slid a business card across the table. "My direct line, day or night." He stood, shrugged his jacket back on, the practiced ease returning like a costume. "We'd love to make this easy for everyone." Rachel picked up the card, heavy stock, embossed lettering. "I'll be in touch," she said.
She sat alone after he left, turning the card over in her fingers. Outside the window, Michigan Avenue moved at its usual indifferent pace. Cabs, cyclists, a woman walking a dog that cost more than Rachel's monthly rent. She thought about $15,000. She thought about Sophie's school trip that she'd had to say no to last month. About the brake pads, about the heating bill she'd been paying in installments since February. $15,000 was real money. But the fact that Stephen Alcott, polished, coached, representing a $50 million development, had appeared in her phone 2 days after the auction and driven to a coffee shop to hand her a number that was above market? That wasn't generosity. That was fear wearing a flat white and a business card. Whatever was on that strip of land, they needed it. Not wanted, needed. She set the card down on the table and opened her phone. She pulled up the Cook County Recorder of Deeds website and wrote down the address and the hours. 2 days. She'd go in 2 days. She picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, and for the first time since walking into that auction room, she let herself think a thought she hadn't allowed before. What if I don't sell at all? It sat in her chest like a small flame, fragile, new, but refusing to go out. She didn't know that by the time she left that coffee shop, Alcott had already made a phone call, and the tone of that call was no longer friendly. The Cook County Recorder of Deeds was not a glamorous place. It occupied a floor of the Richard J. Daley Center downtown, fluorescent lighting, laminate countertops, rows of public terminals that looked like they'd been purchased during the Clinton administration. The carpet was gray. The walls were gray. Even the people waiting in line had taken on a faint grayness, as though the room slowly drained color from everything that stayed too long. Rachel took a number and sat down. She'd arranged everything carefully for today. Sophie was at school. Her shift at the diner didn't start until 4. She'd brought a notepad, 2 pens, in case one ran out, and a folder with every document she had on the property. She looked, she imagined, slightly manic. The woman beside her was playing a word game on her phone. The man on her other side was asleep. She reviewed what she already knew.
The strip was 0.18 acres, narrow, assessed below 10,000, purchased for 85, processed to 11 after fees. It ran alongside the Hallbrook lot. A road, old, worn, unmistakably used, crossed directly through it. Mr. Jenkins had told her it was the only viable access from the street. And Stephen Alcott had appeared with money faster than anyone offers money, unless they're worried about what happens if they don't. What she didn't know yet was the legal architecture underneath all of it. That was why she was here. Number B47 was called.
She stood. The clerk assigned to her was a woman named Patricia, 50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, a demeanor that suggested she had answered the same questions 10,000 times and was at peace with answering them 10,000 more. Rachel explained what she needed: full title history, any recorded easements, deed restrictions, and use designations for Lot 14B on Dearborn Avenue, South Side. Patricia typed without expression. Waited. Typed again. "Going back how far?" she asked. "As far as it goes," Rachel said. Patricia looked at her over the glasses. Then she printed something and handed Rachel a slip with a reference number. "Terminal 4, she said. "Pull that file. You'll want the 1987 plat documents and the 1993 amendment. They're both in there." "What do they show?" Rachel asked. Patricia's expression didn't change. "Terminal 4, she repeated. Terminal 4 was tucked against the far wall, slightly apart from the others, as though the information it contained preferred its privacy. Rachel pulled up the file with the reference number and started reading. The first document was the original 1987 plat map for the South Side Industrial Block, a surveyor's rendering of the entire block as it had been divided and designated that year. She found the strip immediately. Even on the old map it was narrow, running alongside what was labeled simply as Parcel C, Commercial Development Zone. But it was the designation printed inside the strip's boundary that stopped her cold. 3 words: Recorded Access Easement. She leaned closer to the screen. An easement. She knew the word from somewhere in the background of things people talked about, and she'd never needed to understand before. She pulled up a definition on her phone. A legal right to use another person's land for a specific purpose. But this wasn't someone else's land anymore. This was her land, which meant the easement was recorded on a property she now owned, and it designated her strip as the legal access route for the adjoining parcel. She scrolled to the 1993 amendment Patricia had mentioned. This was where it became something else entirely. The 1993 document was a formal easement agreement, signed by the original property owners and recorded with the county. It had been filed when the industrial block was rezoned for potential mixed commercial and residential development. The language was dense and procedural, but Rachel read every line twice. The key section was paragraph 4. She read it 3 times. The access easement recorded upon Lot 14B, Dearborn Avenue, constitutes the sole legal ingress and egress point for the adjoining development parcel, Lot 14C, as defined under Chicago Municipal Code, Chapter 17-3, Zoning and Access Compliance. Any construction or development activity on Lot 14C requiring vehicle access must utilize the designated easement route unless alternative access is formally approved by the Chicago Department of Buildings and the City Zoning Board, subject to full environmental and structural review. Rachel sat back in her chair. She read it again. Sole legal ingress and egress point. Her land wasn't just next to the Hallbrook site. It wasn't just convenient. It wasn't just a road people had used out of habit. It was the only legally recorded entry point for the entire development parcel. Documented, registered, encoded into Chicago Municipal Code. Without access through her strip, Hallbrook's project had no compliant route for construction vehicles. No compliant route meant no building permits issued. No building permits meant no construction. No construction meant no $50 million project. The weight of it settled over her slowly, the way a large, cold wave doesn't knock you down immediately. It just keeps coming until you realize how deep the water is. She had walked into that auction room as a woman clutching a folder and a feeling. She had walked out with $11,000 worth of what the room had considered a joke. The joke was a key, and she was holding it. She printed every relevant page, the plat map, the 1993 easement agreement, the municipal code references. She used the public printer across the room and paid 35 cents per page without blinking. When she gathered the papers and walked back toward the exit, she passed Patricia's counter. "Find what you needed?" Patricia asked, without looking up from her keyboard. "Yes," Rachel said. Then, because she couldn't help it, "Did you know what was in there when you sent me to Terminal 4? Patricia looked up. A pause, deliberate, small. "I've worked here 19 years, honey," she said. "I know what's in most files before I pull them." "Then why didn't you just tell me?" The clerk looked at her with an expression that was not unkind. "Because some things are better when you find them yourself." She went back to her keyboard. "Good luck with whatever you're planning." Rachel walked out of the Daily Center into the cold afternoon air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the printed pages pressed to her chest inside the folder. She thought about her father. About 30 years he'd poured into that garage. The early mornings, the oil-stained hands, the pride he took in doing honest work in a neighborhood that didn't always reward honesty. About the way the bank had taken it from him without ceremony, without recourse, without so much as a letter that acknowledged what it cost. About the way she had been laughed at in that auction room. She thought about Stephen Alcott's card sitting on her kitchen counter, about the phrase, "You got lucky." Then she pulled out her phone. Not to call Alcott. Not yet. Not even close to yet. She searched property lawyers, Southside Chicago, easement cases. One name came up in 3 different results. Daniel Brooks. Small firm. A quote in a neighborhood legal blog from 2 years ago. "Property law in this city protects those who understand it. My job is to make sure that's not only the people who can afford to." She saved his number. The brake pads could wait another week. What she didn't know yet was that Hallbrook had already pulled the same records, 20 minutes after Alcott's coffee shop meeting. And the panic inside that glass high-rise had already begun. The first call came at 7:14 in the morning. Rachel was making Sophie's lunch. Peanut butter, no jelly, banana cut in circles the way Sophie had insisted on since she was 4, when her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She let it ring. 30 seconds later, a voicemail appeared. She played it while spreading peanut butter. "Ms. Carter, this is Richard Haas calling on behalf of Hallbrook Development Group. We've had a chance to review the property situation more thoroughly and would like to revise our previous offer. We're prepared to move to $30,000 for a clean title transfer. This represents a significant increase, and we believe it reflects our genuine interest in resolving this efficiently. Please call us at your earliest convenience." She set down the knife. 30,000. 2 days ago it was 15. Now it was 30. She hadn't called them. She hadn't negotiated. She hadn't done anything except visit the county records office and print some documents that had been sitting in a public database for 30 years. The number had doubled because they were scared. She deleted the voicemail, finished Sophie's lunch, and drove her to school. The legal notice arrived that afternoon. She came home from her morning shift to find an envelope tucked under her apartment door, not slipped through the mail slot, but placed deliberately, the way something is left when someone wants you to know they came to your door. The return address was a law firm, Gareth Klein and Associates,
listed as counsel for Hallbrook Development Group. She sat at her kitchen table and read it carefully, 3 times, the way she'd read the easement documents. The letter was 2 pages, dense with formal language, and its central argument was this. The foreclosure auction, through which Rachel had purchased Lot 14B, had contained a procedural irregularity. Specifically, Hallbrook's legal team claimed that the property had not been properly flagged as encumbered by a recorded easement in the auction disclosure documents, and that this omission constituted grounds to challenge the validity of the sale.
In plain English, they were trying to say the auction had been flawed, and that because of that flaw, Rachel might not actually own what she'd paid for. She read the letter a 4th time. Then she noticed something. The letter didn't say the auction was invalid. It said there may be grounds to challenge it. It used words like potentially, warrants review, and advise you to consider. It was a letter built entirely out of fog, designed to look like a legal threat without technically being one, because a real legal threat would require them to go to court, and going to court would put the easement documents on record in a very public, very official way. They didn't want that. They wanted her to read the word irregularity, feel her stomach drop, and call them. She folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in her folder beside the county documents. Then she texted Daniel Brooks. The second pressure didn't come through a phone or an envelope. It came through the diner. Thursday lunch shift. The place was half full, regulars at the counter, a table of construction workers in the back, a woman with a laptop near the window who ordered the same black coffee and egg white omelet every week and tipped exactly 15%. Rachel was refilling the counter coffees when a man she didn't recognize sat down at the far end. Late 40s, unremarkable clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, the careful ordinariness of someone who didn't want to stand out. He ordered a coffee and a slice of pie without looking at the menu, which meant he'd been here before or had looked the menu up beforehand. She brought his order. He thanked her by name. She hadn't told him her name. Her name tag was in her apron pocket. She'd taken it off an hour earlier when the clasp broke. She hadn't put it back on. She looked at him steadily. "Do I know you?" "No," he said pleasantly. He picked up his fork. "But I know a little about your situation. Property on Dearborn Avenue. Quite a find." Rachel didn't move, didn't reach for the coffee pot, didn't give him anything. "I'm not here to make an offer," he said quickly, reading her expression. "Nothing like that. I'm just... Let's say I'm someone who's watched Hallbrook operate for a while, and I wanted to say something, person to person." He cut into the pie. "Big projects don't wait on small obstacles." He took a bite. "They go around them, or they go through them. Always have." "Is that a warning?" she asked. Her voice was completely level. 12 years of handling difficult customers had built a surface that was hard to crack. He met her eyes. "Call it friendly advice." "I don't remember asking for advice," she said. He smiled. Not Alcott's practiced smile, not Webb's hollow warmth. Something smaller, almost appreciative. "No," he said. "You didn't." He left a 20 on the counter, stood, buttoned his jacket. "Just thought you should know what you're dealing with." He was gone before she could say anything else. She stood at the counter for a moment, the coffee pot in her hand, watching the door. Her manager, Diane, appeared from the kitchen. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm fine," Rachel said. She turned back to the counter. "I'm fine." But she wasn't entirely. Not that night. She sat at her kitchen table after Sophie was asleep, the folder open in front of her, both pages of the Hallbrook legal letter spread out, Alcott's business card in the corner of her vision, like a splinter she hadn't removed. She had a pen in her hand and a notepad, but she hadn't written anything.
The $30,000 offer was real money. More real than she liked to admit. She thought about her bank account, the number she kept in the back of her mind the way you keep a low-grade headache, always there, coloring everything slightly. She thought about Sophie's dental appointment she'd been rescheduling for 3 months. The pile of mail on the counter that she organized by urgency, not importance, because sometimes they weren't the same thing. $30,000 would clear every single thing in that pile. She pressed her pen to the notepad and wrote 2 columns. On the left, sell. On the right, don't. Under sell, she wrote money, security, done, simple, Sophie. Under don't, she wrote Dad. Then she stopped. She stared at the 2 columns for a long time. Then she turned the notepad over so she couldn't see either list. Because she realized the problem wasn't that she didn't know which column was longer. The problem was that she already knew. And she was afraid of what knowing it meant. It meant she was going to walk into something that a $50 million company, a law firm, and a man who knew her name in a diner were all trying to stop her from walking into. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel Brooks. Available tomorrow at 10. Come to the office. Bring everything you have. She looked at Sophie's school drawing stuck to the refrigerator. A house with a yellow sun and 2 figures in front of it, one tall, one small. Underneath, in 6-year-old handwriting, "Me and Mama." She texted back, "I'll be there." She closed the folder, turned off the kitchen light, and for the first time in a week, she slept without the weight of indecision. Because she had made her decision. She just hadn't told anyone yet. What she didn't know was that the man in the diner wasn't working for Holbrook. He was working for someone else entirely. Someone who had been watching this situation develop with very different intentions. Daniel Brooks's office was not what she expected.
She had pictured something like the Holbrook lawyers, glass, chrome, a receptionist who made you feel underdressed. What she found instead was a narrow 2-story building on West 35th Street, wedged between a Dominican restaurant and a dry cleaner, with a hand-painted sign above the door that read, Brooks Property Law, established 2009. The kind of sign that had been painted once and never replaced, because the man inside had decided a long time ago that his reputation would do more advertising than any sign could. She pushed the door open. The waiting area was small and warm. 2 chairs, a side table with a plant that was genuinely thriving, a framed print on the wall of the Chicago lakefront from some time in the 70s. A young woman at a desk looked up and smiled. "Miss Carter, he's ready for you." Daniel Brooks was 51 years old, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the sleeves of his dress shirt rolled to the elbows in a way that suggested he'd been at his desk since early morning. He was broad-shouldered and unhurried, and he stood to shake her hand with the directness of someone who did not perform warmth, but had plenty of the real kind. "Sit down," he said. "Let's see what you've got." She laid everything on his desk. The auction documents, the county plat map, the 1993 easement agreement, the Holbrook legal letter from Gareth Klein and Associates, Alcott's business card, her handwritten notes from the records office. She set it all out in the order she had organized it, which was not the order she'd received it, but the order in which it told a story. He read everything without speaking. She watched him. He didn't rush, didn't skim, didn't make the reassuring noises that people make when they want you to think they're listening. He simply read, occasionally making a small mark in his own notepad. When he finished, he sat back and looked at her. "How did you know to go to the records office?" he asked. "A neighbor told me to," she said, "and I had a feeling." He nodded slowly. "What kind of feeling?" She thought about how to answer that. "The kind you get when someone offers you money before you've asked for it." He almost smiled.
That's good instinct. He tapped the easement document. All right. Let me tell you what you have here, plainly. Please, she said.
Your ownership is valid, he said. Clean. The auction was conducted through standard foreclosure proceedings. Holbrook's letter, he glanced at it with the mild disdain of a man who has read many such letters, is a pressure tactic. The language is deliberately vague. Procedural irregularity is not a legal claim. It's a suggestion of a claim. The distinction matters enormously. If they had actual grounds to challenge the sale, that letter would look very different. It would name a specific statute. It would reference a filing. It would have a deadline. He looked at her. This has none of those things. It was written to frighten, not to fight. Rachel exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding a quiet tension in her shoulders since the letter arrived. The easement, he continued, is fully enforceable. It was recorded in 1993 under Chicago Municipal Code. It's been part of the public land record for over 30 years. The bank that auctioned your property is not legally liable for Holbrook's failure to investigate. It is standard practice and standard expectation that a buyer performs due diligence before developing a site. He paused. Holbrook did not do that. Or they did, and they chose to proceed anyway, betting they could acquire your strip cheaply and quietly before anyone noticed. And then I showed up, Rachel said. And then you showed up, he agreed. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. Here is what this means practically. Without legal access through your land, Holbrook cannot obtain the permits required to begin construction. The Chicago Department of Buildings requires documented access compliance before any commercial development permit is issued. The back alley access doesn't meet the vehicle weight requirements for construction equipment, so until they have your cooperation, formally, legally, their project cannot move forward. The room was very quiet. Any attempt to bypass the easement, he continued, would require them to petition the city for an alternative access approval, which triggers an environmental review, a structural review, a zoning board hearing, and public comment period. We're talking 6 to 12 months minimum, possibly longer, and millions in redesign costs. He let that sit. You are not blocking them, Miss Carter. The law is blocking them. You just happen to be the person holding what they need. It was almost word for word what Mr. Jenkins had implied, standing on the sidewalk in his green jacket. Somehow, hearing it from a lawyer in a document-covered office made it land differently, made it real in a way that felt permanent. What do I do now? She asked. That depends on what you want, he said simply. She told him about the offers, the $15,000, the $30,000, the legal letter, the man in the diner. At the mention of the diner, Daniel's expression changed, subtle but distinct, the way a doctor's face shifts when a patient mentions a symptom that changes the picture. Tell me about him again, he said. Exactly. She described the man, the unremarkable clothes, the careful ordinariness, the fact that he knew her name, the phrase he'd used, big projects don't wait on small obstacles. Daniel wrote something in his notepad. That phrase, he said, that's not Holbrook's language. What do you mean? Holbrook's people are polished, corporate. They don't send someone to a diner to rattle a property owner. That's not their style, and it's not smart. It creates witnesses. He tapped his pen against the desk. Someone else sent that man. Rachel stared at him. Who? He looked at her carefully. There are other parties with interest in that block. The city has been eyeing that South Side corridor for a public infrastructure project for 2 years, a transit extension. If Holbrook's development stalls or collapses, that land becomes available for a different kind of acquisition. He paused. There are people who would prefer Holbrook's project to fail, not to help you, to help themselves.
The temperature in the room seemed to drop slightly. "So someone might be using me," she said.
"Someone might be counting on you," he corrected carefully. "There's a difference. You have agency here, but you should know the full board, not just the pieces in front of you." She sat with that for a moment. "Does it change what I should do?" she asked. He considered the question with genuine seriousness. "No," he said finally. "Your position is your position, regardless of who else benefits from it. What matters is what you want the outcome to be." He looked at her steadily. "So I'll ask again. What do you want?" She looked at the easement document on his desk, at her father's name in her handwriting on the notepad she'd brought, at the folder that had started as a feeling and turned into something she couldn't have imagined in the auction room 10 days ago. "I want what my father should have had," she said. "Something that lasts." Daniel nodded. He didn't say, "That's beautiful," or "I understand." He picked up his pen. "Then let's talk about how to make that happen," he said. 3 floors above LaSalle Street, in a Halbrook conference room, a construction timeline on a whiteboard had just been wiped clean for the second time in a week. And Marcus Webb, for the first time in 20 years of development, had no answer for what came next. The construction equipment arrived on a Tuesday. Rachel saw it from across the street on her way to work. 3 flatbed trucks parked along Dearborn Avenue, a yellow excavator sitting on the last one, like a patient animal waiting to be unloaded. 2 workers in hard hats stood beside the Halbrook site fence, drinking coffee from paper cups, looking at something on a clipboard. She slowed her car. The gate to the development lot was open. Someone had removed the padlock she'd seen on her first visit. She noticed, with a cold clarity, that the worn track crossing her land, the access road, the easement, the thing that was now the legal spine of everything, had fresh tire marks on it. They had driven across her land without asking. She sat in her car for 30 seconds, breathed. Then she took 3 photographs through the windshield, drove to the diner, and texted them to Daniel before she'd even taken off her coat. His reply came 11 minutes later. "Don't touch anything. Don't speak to anyone on site. I'm making a call." The halt order came 4 days later. She didn't witness it directly. She was on a double shift. But Mr. Jenkins called her that evening, and his voice carried the particular satisfaction of a man who had waited a long time to see something corrected. "They showed up this afternoon," he said. 2 inspectors from the Department of Buildings, city vehicles. They walked the perimeter, took measurements, asked the foreman a lot of questions he didn't have answers to. A pause. Then they posted a notice on the gate. "What kind of notice?" Rachel asked, already knowing. "Red 1, Jenkins said. Temporary construction halt. Non-compliance with access requirements under Chicago zoning code." Another pause. The foreman got on his phone before the inspector's car left the block. Rachel thanked him and hung up. She sat on the edge of her bed in the quiet apartment, Sophie asleep down the hall, the city doing its usual nighttime murmur outside the window, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something more complicated. Something that understood that the halt order was real and consequential and affected people beyond Marcus Webb and Stephen Alcott. Workers, contractors, suppliers. People with their own folders and their own brake pads and their own versions of Sophie's school drawings on their refrigerators. She held that feeling without trying to resolve it. Then she stood up and went to the kitchen and made tea, because there was nothing else to do with it right now, and tomorrow she had to be back at the diner at 6. By the end of the week, it had become a news story, not front page, page 7 of the Tribune's City section, a brief item under the headline, "Halbrook Meridian Project Faces Permit Setback Over Access Dispute." 3 paragraphs.
The third one mentioned, without naming her, that a private property owner held a legally recorded easement over the sole access point to the development lot. But the television stations moved faster than the Tribune. A local news crew set up across the street from the site on Friday afternoon. Rachel watched the coverage on her phone during her break. A reporter in a gray coat standing in front of the silent excavator, explaining the situation with the practiced gravity of someone who knew a compelling story when they stumbled onto one.
The chyron at the bottom read, $50 million development stalled. City cites access violation. Her phone buzzed twice while she was watching. Both unknown numbers. She let them go to voicemail. The coverage changed something on the street. Neighbors who had barely acknowledged the Hallbrook site began stopping in front of it, reading the halt notice, talking among themselves. The Dominican restaurant owner, 2 doors from Daniel's office, taped a printed article to his window with a handwritten note underneath. "This block belongs to this community." Mrs. Kowalski brought Rachel a casserole and said, with the unshakable conviction of a 70-year-old Polish woman, "Your father would be proud." Then she left before Rachel could respond, which was probably merciful. Jenkins called again on Saturday. "There's a woman from the alderman's office who's been asking around," he said. "Wants to know who owns the easement property." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing," he said. "Not my story to tell." On Sunday, Rachel drove to the site alone. She parked where she always did, got out, and walked to the strip of land. The halt notice was visible from here, bright red against the Hallbrook gate, official and immovable. The construction equipment sat exactly where it had been unloaded, going nowhere, costing someone money with every idle hour. She stood at the remnant of her father's brick wall. She thought about what Daniel had told her in the office, that there were other parties watching, other interests circling, that the board was larger than the pieces she could see. She thought about the man in the diner and his careful ordinariness. She thought about the transit extension Daniel had mentioned, the city's interest in the corridor, the possibility that powerful people were using her situation as a chess piece without telling her she was on the board. She made a mental note to ask Daniel about that directly at their next meeting. She had learned, in the past 2 weeks, to name the things she didn't know as clearly as the things she did. Then she thought about something else. She thought about what she actually wanted the outcome to look like. Not just the legal outcome, the real one. The one that would still mean something in 5 years, 10 years. The one Sophie might understand when she was old enough to hear the story. She looked at the cracked concrete, the weeds, the ghost of a wall. This block had had something once. Before the foreclosures, before the clearing, before the development signs and the investor presentations and the $50 million promises made in rooms that looked nothing like this street. It had had garages and fabrication shops and welding places and people who worked with their hands and knew their neighbors' names. Her father had been one of those people. She didn't want to simply stop Hallbrook's project. She didn't want to hold a strip of land like a toll booth and collect what she was owed and walk away. She wanted something built here that included the people who had always been here, not as an afterthought, not as a line item in a community benefit checkbox, but as a genuine part of what this block became. She pulled out her phone and called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "They're going to call," she said. "Soon. The media coverage changes things. They can't afford to let this drag out publicly." "Agreed," he said. "When they do, I don't want to just negotiate a price." A pause. "What do you want to negotiate?" She turned and looked at the site, the silent machines, the red notice, the signs still promising something, coming spring 2026, as though nothing had changed. "Terms," she said. "Real ones. The kind that mean something after the check clears." Daniel was quiet for a moment.
When he spoke, his voice carried the specific energy of a lawyer who has just realized the case is more interesting than he originally thought.
"Then we need to prepare," he said. "Because when Holbrook calls, they won't be calling to give you anything. They'll be calling to take back control."
"I know," Rachel said. She looked one last time at her father's wall. "Let them come," she said. What neither Rachel nor Daniel knew was that the call, when it came, wouldn't be from Alcott or Webb. It would come from someone much higher, someone who had never spoken to a property owner directly in 20 years of development.
And that, more than anything, would tell Rachel exactly how desperate they had become. The call came on a Wednesday morning at 8:47. Rachel was dropping Sophie at school when her phone rang. The number was a downtown Chicago area code, 312 LaSalle Street corridor, the kind of number attached to a floor rather than a person. She waited until Sophie disappeared through the school doors, then answered. "Miss Carter?" The voice was older, measured, not Alcott's performed ease, not Webb's hollow warmth. Something different. The voice of a man who had spent decades in rooms where everything was decided before anyone sat down, and who was unaccustomed to situations that did not resolve themselves according to his preferences. "My name is Gerald Holbrook." She recognized the name immediately, not from the business cards or the legal letters, from the building sign. Gerald Holbrook, the founder, the name on the company. He had never called a property owner directly in 20 years. Daniel had been right. "Mr. Holbrook," she said, keeping her voice completely even. "I'd like to invite you to our offices," he said. "Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. I think it's time we had a genuine conversation. Without intermediaries, without letters, without any of the noise that's happened over the past few weeks." A pause that was too brief to be casual. "I think we can find something that works well for everyone." She looked out through the windshield at the school entrance, at the small figures moving through the doors in their winter coats. "I'll be there," she said. "With my lawyer." A beat. "Of course," he said, as though he'd expected nothing less, as though this had always been the plan. She called Daniel before she'd pulled out of the school parking lot. "Gerald Holbrook called me directly," she said. A silence. Then, "Okay." His voice had that same quality she'd noticed in the office, alert, recalibrated, like a compass needle finding north. "That's significant." "Thursday at 10, their offices." "Good," he said. "That means we go to them. Their territory feels like their advantage, but it isn't. When you walk into someone's building with a position they can't legally circumvent, the architecture doesn't matter." He paused. "We have 2 days. We need to prepare everything, not just what we want, how we ask for it, in what order, and what we're willing to hold on." "I already know what I want," Rachel said. "I know," he said. "But there's a difference between knowing what you want and knowing how to sit across a table from Gerald Holbrook and get it." They met at Daniel's office that evening. He had done his own preparation. On the desk between them were documents she hadn't seen before. Holbrook Development Group's public filings, the city permits already issued for the Meridian project, a timeline of their financing structure and draw schedule. He'd also pulled news coverage of 2 previous Holbrook developments and the community opposition they'd faced. "Their investors are on a draw schedule," he said, pointing to a line in the filing. "They've already pulled the first tranche, $12 million. Every week the project is stalled, they're paying interest on capital they can't deploy. At their project scale, that's somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000 a week in carrying costs." He looked at her. "They cannot afford a long negotiation. They need this resolved." "Which means we don't rush," Rachel said. "Which means we don't rush," he agreed. "But we also don't stall artificially. That invites litigation and erodes goodwill we might need for the non-financial terms. He folded his hands. Tell me everything you want. Every single thing. We'll sort it into what we lead with, what we hold for the middle, and what we reveal at the end. So she told him. She told him about the community auto shop. Not a gesture, not a plaque with her father's name, but a functioning facility with equipment, staffing, and a lease arrangement that protected it for at least 20 years. She told him about the job training program, local residents, real credentials, partnerships with the city trade unions. She told him about the public access improvements for the block, sidewalks, lighting, the kind of infrastructure the South Side got promised every election cycle and rarely received. And she told him about the compensation, not a number she'd calculated from the easement's market value, but from what a 20-year easement agreement would legitimately be worth to a $50 million project over the life of its operation. Daniel wrote everything down without blinking. "That's a substantial ask," he said when she finished. "Is it unreasonable?" she asked. He considered it. "No," he said. "It's precisely what the position supports, which is what matters." He looked at her over his reading glasses. "But here's what you need to understand walking in Thursday. They will come with a number first. It will be large, probably larger than you expect. And that number is designed to do one thing: make you feel like you've won before the real negotiation starts." "So I don't react to the number," she said. "You don't react to the number," he said. "You acknowledge it, you thank them for it, and then you tell them what you actually need." The Halbrook Group offices occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower on LaSalle Street, 6 blocks from the auction room, where 30 days ago a room full of people had laughed at her. She noticed that as the elevator rose. The reception area was everything she'd expected: polished stone, low furniture, the kind of curated silence that costs money to maintain. A woman led them to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a long table and 6 chairs arranged on one side with 3 on the other. 6 against 2. An old negotiating room trick. Rachel sat down in the center chair on her side without hesitating. Gerald Halbrook entered 2 minutes later. He was 70, or close to it. Silver-haired, compact, wearing a suit that was expensive without advertising it. Behind him came Marcus Webb and a woman Rachel hadn't seen before, who carried a leather portfolio and was introduced as their lead counsel, Patricia Vance. No Alcott. She noticed that. Alcott had been the friendly face. This was a different room. Halbrook sat directly across from Rachel. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, assessing, categorizing, calculating. Then something shifted, very slightly, and she realized he was recalibrating. She was not what he'd expected. She filed that away. "Ms. Carter," he said, "thank you for coming. I'll be direct. It's the only way I know how to operate." He glanced at a document in front of him. "We're prepared to offer you $850,000 for a permanent easement agreement over Lot 14B, with a full title option at $1.2 million. The number landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. $850,000. She felt Daniel, beside her, remain perfectly still. She kept her own face calm, not blank, not performatively unimpressed, just calm. The face of someone who had expected a large number and had prepared for what it was designed to do. "Mr. Halbrook," she said, "that's a meaningful offer, and I appreciate the directness." She paused. 1 beat. 2. "But I'd like to tell you what I actually need." Something moved in Halbrook's expression. Not anger, something closer to respect, reluctant, surprised, but genuine. "Go ahead," he said. She took the folder from her bag and placed it on the table. Not the legal documents, those were Daniel's territory. Her folder,
the one she'd been building since the auction, the one with her notes, her handwriting, her father's name. She opened it. "The easement stays in my family's name," she began, "and here is what comes with it." She spoke for 11 minutes without interruption.
When she finished, the room was quiet, in a different way than it had been when she entered. Not the curated silence of expensive furniture, the silence of people recalculating. Marcus Webb was looking at the table. Patricia Vance was writing. Gerald Holbrook was looking at Rachel. "The auto shop," he said, finally. "You want it operational, not decorative." "Operational," she confirmed. 20-year protected lease, embedded in the easement agreement so it can't be dissolved without renegotiating access. He looked at her for a long moment. "You thought about this carefully," he said. "I've had 30 days, she said. "And my father had 30 years. Another silence. Then Gerald Holbrook did something Marcus Webb and Stephen Alcott hadn't done in any of their meetings. He nodded. Not a concession, not a defeat. The nod of a man who had just realized, somewhat against his will, that he was sitting across from someone who understood exactly what she was holding and exactly what to do with it. "Let's talk terms," he said. Outside, 4 floors below on LaSalle Street, the man from the diner stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the Halbrook building. He made a call. "She didn't take the first number," he said. A pause, then, "Good, neither should she." The agreement took 9 days to finalize. Not 9 days of conflict, 9 days of careful, deliberate construction. The kind of building that happens when 2 sides have stopped pretending the other doesn't exist and started working towards something neither could have made alone. Daniel sat across from Patricia Vance in 3 separate sessions, documents spread between them, language negotiated line by line with the particular patience of people who understood that words written into legal agreements outlive the feelings present when they are signed. Rachel attended every session. She did not perform expertise she didn't have. When the legal language became dense, she asked Daniel to translate. When the discussion moved to her terms, she spoke clearly and held firm without aggression. The auto shop clause held through every session. She had expected that to be the point of greatest resistance. It was the most unusual ask, the furthest from a standard easement agreement. But after the first session, Holbrook's team stopped pushing on it. She learned later, from Daniel, that Gerald Holbrook had made an internal decision after their meeting in the conference room. He had told his team, "The shop stays. Move on." She didn't know what had changed in him in that moment. She didn't need to. What mattered was what was written. The final agreement contained the following: a permanent easement in the name of the Carter Family Trust, a legal structure Daniel established to protect the land across generations, granting Halbrook Development Group formal access rights through Lot 14B for the duration of the Meridian Project and any subsequent development on the adjoining parcel. Compensation of $940,000, structured across an initial payment and a 20-year access fee. Not the first number, not the second. The right number. The one that reflected what a legal lifeline to a $50 million project was actually worth. The Carter Community Auto Center, a fully equipped automotive repair facility constructed by Halbrook at their cost, embedded within the Meridian Development's ground floor commercial space, with a 20-year protected lease held by the Carter Family Trust. Operating costs for the first 3 years covered by a fund established within the agreement. A trade apprenticeship program, formerly named the Joseph Carter Skills Initiative, partnering with 2 Southside trade unions, offering 12 paid apprenticeships per year in automotive, electrical, and construction trades to residents of the surrounding zip codes. Public infrastructure improvements to the Dearborn Avenue block, resurfaced sidewalks, updated street lighting, and the installation of a small public plaza on the corner adjacent to the Carter Community Auto Center. A local hiring commitment. No less than 40% of permanent positions within the Meridian Development, retail, maintenance, management, to be offered first to residents of the Southside community, verifiable annually. When Daniel placed the final document in front of her at his office on a gray Tuesday afternoon, she read every page. He sat across from her and did not rush her. She signed her name at the bottom. Joseph Carter's daughter. The city alderman's office contacted her the day after the signing. The woman who'd been asking around the neighborhood, whose name, Rachel now knew, was Councilwoman Diane Marsh, called to congratulate her and to ask if she'd be willing to speak at a community event on the block. Rachel almost said no. She was not someone who sought rooms. She had spent most of her adult life moving through the background of other people's foregrounds, taking orders, filling cups, making lunches, driving routes. Being visible in a deliberate way felt unfamiliar in the way that most things worth doing feel unfamiliar at first. But she thought about the man in the diner, about his careful ordinariness, his suggestion that big projects don't wait on small obstacles, his quiet confidence that she would handle herself. Daniel had tried to find out who he was, had made inquiries through channels Rachel didn't fully understand. What he'd discovered was that the man worked for a community land trust, a non-profit that had been trying for 2 years to secure protections for Southside properties against exactly the kind of displacement that large developments brought. He hadn't been using her. He'd been watching to see if she needed help, and when she hadn't, he'd stepped back. She called the number Daniel had found and left a message she wasn't sure would be returned. It was returned within the hour. "You did well," the man said. His voice was the same as the diner, calm, unremarkable, carrying something underneath it. "You could have told me who you were," she said. "You didn't need me to," he said. "You needed to know you could do it without me. There's a difference." She sat with that. "The land trust," she said. "Are there other properties on this block you're trying to protect?" A pause, then, "Why do you ask?" "Because I think," she said slowly, "that the Carter Family Trust and a community land trust might have some things to talk about." Another pause, longer. "I think you might be right," he said. The groundbreaking event was held on a Saturday morning in early spring. The Chicago sky did what Chicago skies do in April, changed its mind 3 times before 8 in the morning, then settled into something pale and clear and cool that felt like a promise it intended to keep. Folding chairs had been arranged on the sidewalk facing the Meridian site. A small stage, a podium, balloons in blue and white that the wind kept testing. Rachel stood to the side while the alderman's office organized people into their correct positions, watching the block fill with a crowd she hadn't fully anticipated. Neighbors, construction workers, representatives from the trade unions, a woman from the Tribune who wanted a photograph, 2 camera crews. Mr. Jenkins arrived early, in a good coat she hadn't seen before, and found a chair in the second row without being directed to it. He caught her eye across the gathering and gave her a nod. Small, complete. Sophie was beside her, wearing her red coat, holding Rachel's hand and watching everything with the wide, cataloging attention of a child who is storing a memory without knowing it. "Mama," she said, "is this because of our land?" "Yes," Rachel said. "The land Grandpa had?" Rachel looked down at her. "The land Grandpa left us." Sophie considered this. "So he helped?" Rachel felt the thing move through her. Not grief exactly, but its quieter companion, the kind that arrives when loss stops being only loss and starts being something you can carry forward. "Yes," she said. "He helped." When she stepped to the podium, the crowd settled. She had not written a speech. She had started one,
3 times, and stopped each time because the words felt too large for what she actually wanted to say. In the end, she had decided to say only what was true.
30 days ago, she said, I bought a piece of land for $11,000 and a feeling I couldn't name. The crowd was quiet. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew why I was doing it. She paused. My father built something on this block for 30 years. When it was taken from him, this strip of land was all that was left. The bank thought it was worth nothing. The developers thought it was worth a small check and a quick goodbye. She looked out at the faces. They were wrong about the land, she said. They were wrong about me. She let a breath go. And I think they were wrong about this neighborhood. A sound moved through the crowd. Not applause, something warmer. Recognition. What gets built here now will carry his name, she said. And it will serve the people who were always supposed to be served by this block. She stepped back from the podium. The applause came then, real and unorganized, the way genuine things tend to be. Afterward, while the cameras packed up and the chairs were folded and the balloons made their escape one by one into the April sky, Rachel walked to the strip of land. Her land. She stood at the remnant of her father's brick wall one last time. By summer, it would be gone, incorporated into the construction, part of the foundation of what came next. She had negotiated its preservation in spirit, if not in stone. A plaque embedded in the auto center wall that would read, Joseph Carter worked here. So will you. She pressed her palm flat against the brick. Cold, sun-bleached, stubborn. She stood there for a moment, not crying, not quite, just breathing the particular kind of quiet that remains when something has been resolved in the way it was always meant to be resolved. Not loudly, not perfectly, but truly. Then Sophie appeared at her elbow, slipping her small hand into Rachel's. "Can we get breakfast?" Sophie asked. Rachel laughed, a real one, from somewhere unguarded. "Yes," she said, "we can get breakfast." She took her daughter's hand, turned her back on the wall, and walked toward the rest of it. Some land looks like nothing until the right person looks at it right. Joseph Carter had known. Now, finally, so did she.